Hi, everybody. Joe Moore back again for Psychedelics today, joined by Court Wing from Remap Therapeutics. How's it going today, Court?
Good. How you doing, Joe?
Doing lovely. Just got done my second, or I guess this is my second live stream of the day, so I'm excited about that, and can't wait to do more. Hopefully, but
Do
yeah.
you have a
Mhm.
do you have a current record of how many live streams in a single day you've done?
No, no. But
Really?
our broadcast was used once for the Alaska legalization group
Mm.
that produces Arctic Visions conference. They used it for a 24-hour stream, a fundraising stream, as they were trying to get their uh, bill passed.
Wow. I mean, I
Yeah,
guess if there's no sunset, there's no need to go to bed, right? Perhaps
I hope they went to bed. Yeah.
24
Anyway, we're talking about a
hours.
different state today. My
Yeah.
sister lived in Anchorage for a little bit, and there was this whole thing where people would just not go to sleep for a little bit so they could go fishing between work, or whatever it was, because the winter's quite dark, turns out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, I guess it's a little more intense than Seattle. So,
It's
um,
just constantly gray during the winter. I mean, that's the thing about Seattle meteorologically. It's not the rain. It's not the rainfall, it's how long it's overcast. There's more
mhm,
rainfall in New York than there is in Seattle, though the frequency of the rain in Seattle is what really does it.
mhm.
So, anyways.
All right. So today we're here to talk about a little bit of a drier place, New Mexico, slightly south of Colorado, directly south of Colorado, a state I love quite a bit. Spent a decent amount of time in Santa Fe. They recently have been working quite hard on their psilocybin legalization efforts. And just the other day, was it yesterday or the day before, Court? You were on this live stream kind of meeting with some
I
of
believe
the.
it was the day before. Yeah,
Mhm.
rulemaking committee, I'm pretty sure.
And there was some interesting conversations. We wanted to expand a little bit on a number of conversations that were happening there. And I've been working at this for quite a while. You have two. Turns out drugs and substances like psilocybin are quite safe. Their harm risk profile is quite low. David Nutt kind of famously pointed this out in his 2009 harm scale, I think it was, in the Lancet. And I don't know if I actually even talked to you about this, Court, but a group, including Alan Davis, put out a update on that from an American perspective somewhat
Oh,
recently.
really?
Yeah.
How
Um,
and what are
Within the last
they?
2 months, very interesting, quite similar results. Um, and go figure. So, what we can say, psilocybin and LSD seem to be quite safe. Um, but let's dig in. What was high level? There were conversations around valvular heart disease. There was conversations around exclusionary conditions. And what was the major other kind of high level category?
So the major thrust was and there was some paperwork that a bunch of us didn't get the morning of, but it was mostly what are qualifying conditions, and then what tier do those qualifying conditions fall under? Where can exceptions be made for, I guess, the degree of symptom severity or if other conditions are involved? And then what would be required in terms of supervision, uh, people that are facilitating, right? And so they have a very specific approach right now, which is something like 3 preparatory sessions, and then the session itself, and then the integration session afterwards. So they are following a very classic psychological treatment framework that we see in most of the clinical trials out there, right? So when I went through at NYU, like I had 2 hour and a half long preparatory sessions, maybe as many as 3. Then there was the dosing day itself, and then there were 3 integration sessions afterwards. And and done in a standard on the couch, eye shades, headphones, minimal dialogue type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as they were getting into the weeds a bit, they started discussing what the more severe the conditions are, the more often they expect to see comorbidities. And so then people, you have people that understand it from my standpoint, that most of who's going to be coming into this are going to be people with comorbidities, and they are going to have varying degrees of severity in the different conditions. And you have to navigate that, and you have to prepare, and you have to get ready. But there's a lot of people who just, as soon as someone qualifies for, say, any type of complicating issue, that's it. And so in the case of um, therefore qualifying conditions: PTSD, treatment resistant depression, end of life, and what's number 4? PTSD, end of life. No, it'll come back to me. I've got it here somewhere. And the fact of the matter is, they're still trying to use this psychological model that many people would come in and not need, say, 25 milligrams or 5 grams or what have you, if it, depending if it's dried or if it's synthetic. And they don't necessarily need direct psychological supervision. Like, say, I brought up, it's like, hey, Court Wing, Psychedelics and Pain Association, you guys are bringing up subperceptual doses here. Every single of these qualifying conditions is bidirectional with chronic pain. Many people, as we know from the Pain Journal article in September of 2022, are taking microdoses daily. You can't schedule that out in advance. Also, in a more specific circumstance, say with cluster headache, right? If they're following, like, say, the standard pulse regimen that Emmanuel Schindler has investigated at Yale, they're taking 1 to 2 grams once every 5 days. That's not the if you that's not the same amount. You don't need intense supervision, and you can't really plan for when those headaches are gonna, like, necessarily hit, right? And so currently they have no specific inclusionary criteria for pain right now. That might get added later, but they're trying to get these 4 qualifying conditions covered first, then they'll go on to add the others. The other issue that many people kept bringing up, though, was I think borrowing, if I read correctly, because we were having to kind of read off the screen, Oregon in their model, one of the things that they bring up is uncontrolled diabetes or severe hypertension, right? Cardiac issues, right? And so diabetes, uncontrolled diabetes, and cardiac conditions are very closely linked, sadly. So is chronic pain with type 2 diabetes. And there were psychologists on that call that were just signing off of, well, Oregon says this is a disqualifying condition for this treatment, so we should follow suit. And it's just like, I was going to shut up, and then I saw that, and it's like, no, okay, because I've seen both with case studies I've worked with through REMAP as well as PPA. There's one I'm not going to go into too deeply right now, but they have a very, very severe pain condition responding to a extraordinarily unique compound. But in preparation, they had been trying microdosing psilocybin. And this is a person with very active type 2 diabetes, and they've made 0 lifestyle changes, right? What we consider, changes in their exercise, changes in their sleep, changes in their diet primarily, right? Eliminating certain foods that might promote type 2 diabetes and all the issues that causes, this metabolic disorder. And so there are people that were just like, okay, well, we certainly need to make sure uncontrolled diabetes is an exclusionary criteria here. And it's like, okay, wait a second. There's just been a study released from, released from Italy, where we show very, very actively, in this robust mouse model where it's using high fat, high lipid diet to induce type 2 diabetes in mice. They microdose the mice, sub-perceptual doses of psilocybin. I'll get back to the case study in a second, I promise. They microdose the mice 5 days a week for 12 weeks. I think it's 12 weeks. And they completely reversed the symptom profile for type 2 diabetes. Reduced obesities without any changes in diet, right? Reduced liver, so what's called hepatic toxicity, liver toxicity, right? So many things going on there that cause liver inflammation, liver toxicity. Primarily, they're reducing triglycerides, right? Pro-inflammatory triglycerides. They're reducing blood glucose, and crucially, they're reducing insulin resistance. That's gigantic. That's absolutely profoundly gigantic. And as I was mentioning with this case study, right? So this person, in preparation for taking this unique compound to treat their very, very severe pain condition, they had tried lower dose psilocybin, right? Didn't create any change in their pain condition, at least not when they first tried 2 years ago. It did instantly plunge their blood glucose levels, however. And so recently there was, 2 years in remission, there was a hiccup, and then made some changes with them very actively. And then we suggested to them, why don't you try the microdosing the psilocybin again? Right? Because this paper that I just mentioned had just been released showing these profound changes. They started doing it again, and these are lower doses, right? These are barely, for this person, essentially they're sub-perceptual. And they were sending me pictures of their blood glucose monitor. Normally this person is hovering somewhere around 250 on their blood glucose monitor. They're dropping down to 95, then to 65. And then I said, hey, can you send me screenshots of the memory in your glucose monitor? And it's like, yeah, there are days and days and days, like as had been happening with them, where they had this elevated blood glucose. As soon as they started microdosing, down it goes. And with that, they lost, one thing that happens when you have diabetes is peripheral neuropathy, right? Peripheral neuropathy of all kinds. So burning hands, burning feet, right? And so there's this whole discussion in the both in the chat and then people coming online to share what they're, lots of people, there's been this discussion for years, and Joe, this is your moment to shine and shine. There's been this discussion for a long time. I even remember bringing this up online to Robin Carhart Harris and some of his colleagues, where there was some study came out, and I was like, that's it. It proves it. It's like 5-HT2B phantom is nonsense. So there's been this discussion for a long time. When you microdose chronically, daily, right, there's this concern that it's going to cause heart valve issues, heart valve disease, right? HVD for short. So that's valvular myopathy, where the muscles of the heart valve kind of bulk up, but then that causes a poor fit, poor closure. And then we get what's called aortic regurgitation, where the blood is regurgitating through the aorta, big vein and aorta. I'm sorry, vein. Anyways, and you get literally backwash into the previous heart chamber. That causes really bad complications health-wise. It becomes a significant risk for that is a heart disease in and of itself, but like things like heart attack and all sorts of stuff, and very poor energy management, things of that nature. And so there's this concern because the Italian study shows in this microdosing of mice, right? Sub-perceptual, they know it's sub-perceptual, at least for mice, because they don't have the head twitch response, right? and 5 days a week for 12 weeks. That's, and what they've discovered though was it's not happening across the 5-HT2A receptor, where most of the classic psychedelic activity is documented to be occurring, right? That's the main mechanism of action. It's happening on 5-HT2B. But the argument has been from many people, hey, microdosing is dangerous because it's happening, it's also active on 5-HT2B. That's going to promote this valvular myopathy, aortic regurgitation, right? And so someone in the chat is like, well, don't you think that this, like I said, you guys need to catch up with the literature. I understand the concern about the cardiac issues with the diabetes, but I'm telling you, if these people have uncontrolled diabetes, they've likely exhausted standard of fucking care, right? I didn't say that, but they likely exhausted standard of care. And this might be the one chance they have to actually have an impact on it. In fact, psilocybin might be one of the only things that'll make a difference in it. And I knew this because of this case study we're working on, right? This person's like very rapidly reversing, but someone's like putting in the chat, oh, don't you think it's, or asking out loud, don't you think it's possible that maybe what's going on is they're having a reframing in their attitude about taking healthy choices, and maybe they've had a reframing around their food and now maybe exercise, and they're able to adopt these behaviors and everything. And it's like, sure, that's what's happening, but here's what's happening on the chemotherapeutic level, right? So when we're talking about these lifestyle choices and impacts, it's like, yes, we see that from like studies on OCD, right? And psychedelics and psilocybin specifically. We see that on studies specifically around eating disorders, because then what we're talking about is what are known as hedonic and satiety controls. Satiety, right? I'm full. I've eaten enough. I don't need to eat anymore, or I haven't eaten enough, right? I need to eat more. So it can go both ways into dysfunction. And then the hedonic controls is I'm enjoying the food is satisfying, or the food is not satisfying. So that's also regulating in a way your nutrition levels, right? And so that's kind of what they're talking about. But it's like, no, it's not just that. We are altering the neurochemical pathways in terms of how your body is responding to the onboarding of glucose, how your insulin is regulating that, so many things, right? So when you have peripheral neuropathy, going back to that, and I know I'm pinging everywhere, everybody, thank you for your patience. When you have type 2 diabetes, there's peripheral neuropathy, there's usually burning, and so they're taking other drugs to control the burning, to control, like, it can be very severe pain, right? And eventually that will progress into neurodegeneration where the myelin sheath and the blood glucose levels are such that it's actually breaking down the nervous tissue. And then we have reduced circulation out there, very poor circulation. And then we start talking about digit loss, right? You start losing fingertips, finger joints, and then eventually, and it's a tragedy. Like, my people I know who work in communities that are economically very, very disenfranchised, right? It's a plague. It's a plague in social work. It's a plague in all sorts of places like that, where you have these compromised communities, and type 2 diabetes is like this. There's certain words I don't want to use. It's just, it's this massive epidemic of very severe health consequences. And so they're just saying, though, isn't it more likely reframing? No, it's not just reframing. But we know from, is it Diego? Please remind me of his name.
Diego Pinzon out of Australia, former lead at Vital.
So he and I have had a long discussion about, like, and these are things I've experienced. These are things we've heard repeatedly. People start macrodosing, microdosing, and there's just this incredible, for some people that it works, this incredible change. Suddenly they desire to exercise. And it's not this like thing they have to cognitively drive themselves to do anymore. It's this desire to move, right? So like this anhedonia, this loss of pleasure is disappearing. There's a desire to move, right? And there's also a desire to start eating healthier. And like, we worked with someone with very, very severe neuropathic pain, complex PTSD. There was also an onboard eating disorder, and that just got wiped off the map. Just radically and profoundly ended in the space of about 2 days. And that's been the change ever since. And we've seen this over and over throughout the literature. But still this 5-HT2B boogeyman hangs out there. And so someone started bringing up cardiac issues. And so I entered this other, and once again, this is your time to shine, Joe. I brought up this other study that was released in 2025, assessing the potential cardiovascular risk of microdosing the psychedelic LSD in mice. And what they show is that when they are chronically dosing mice, microdoses of LSD compared to serotonin or fenfluramine, right? So fen is where most of this heart valve fear about psychedelics came from. It was this weight loss drug, surprise, right? Active on 5-HT2B, but when people took fen, if everyone remembers fen from the aughts and the 90s, I think it was, it was causing HVD, heart valve disease. Yeah, it's a big deal. You don't want that. And when they gave these mice serotonin nonstop for 4 weeks and 8 weeks, they would either develop heart valvular myopathy or aortic regurgitation, right? So when they did it with serotonin, when they did it with fenfluramine, both caused issue. LSD did not. Why? It's too damn small. It goes into the receptor, but it's too small to cause these issues because of receptor selectivity, right? Just because it's operating on that receptor doesn't mean it's doing the same thing. Each chemical is doing something different. It's too small, and then it gets out of there. It undocks 13 hours later, and that's fine. And they showed that that's also the same case for psilocybin. So it's quite a change in what we're expecting, with this new study from Italy. And there was a previous study that I had brought out from, what was it, last year or the year before, where there was a white paper we did for a former senator who is out sharing information about psychedelics and chronic pain with all sorts of audiences. And they had said, well, they were excited. She goes, it's not like you have anything out there, though, that's effective for diabetes. And I just piped right up. Oh, yes, we do. Because I knew about the case study, and I found out about this other paper, the impact of psilocybin on the high glucose lipid-induced changes. That's a high-fat, high-sugar diet that causes essentially type 2 diabetes. So impact of psilocybin on high glucose lipid-induced changes in IS1 cell viability and dedifferentiation. So essentially, your pancreas is producing islet cells that become part of what regulates blood sugar, right? And they come out as dedifferentiated cells. So you have a stem cell, that's a dedifferentiated cell, right? It's a raw basic cell, and then it differentiates into different cell types, different cell functions. And psilocybin decreases the negative impact of high glucose, high lipid changes in cell viability. How robust is that cell? How well does it live? How well does it survive? Right? And its ability to differentiate into useful cells. right? That's the problem when we're high fat, high sugar diets. You know, it causes de-differentiation. They cause us to regress and not to live as long. Also, think about that. Just think about that in terms of the other mouse study that came out with high dose, very high dose psilocybin, like really high doses once a month, and they did that for 15 months, and it increased cellular lifespan and reversed aging in mice. Right? It gave them about another, the equivalent of something like another, I don't know, 13 years or something like that on their life. It was very, very significant. Now, a lot of people had everything they wanted to say about that. Oh, it's unrealistic. And it was the same thing though with this study, where I brought up this study to this, senator and to other people, and they're like, "Oh, it's too early. You're saying that it's effective against diabetes and things like that way too early." Well, it's trending, guys. It is trending. So I think there's enough out there. I wish people would look at more case studies and anecdotal reports and not just discount them out of hand. Look at them as a trend line. Look at why would people report this stuff. I mean, there's zero incentive for people to go out and like, oh, I'm losing weight. Oh, I'm eating better. But it's like, it's one of those things it's this emergent property, and it's beyond just the satiety and hedonic controls, right? Though those are very, very important regulatory mechanisms, particularly for lifestyle and reframing. I don't want to discount that, but it's never the only mechanism of action at play. It never is. So, anyways,
just to be clear for people, Court's saying the data is trending towards this conclusion. We've got a constellation of data, and we should be looking at that data to say, yes, we are kind of inferring that this is a direction things might go, and we need to be asking serious questions. And we Court exist a little bit outside of the traditional clinical frame, and as a result, are willing to experiment beyond standard of care interventions. But standard of care interventions really need to be looked at first in a lot of these cases. And we're not saying something crazy like skip insulin, eat mushrooms. Like, that's not
no.
true. We're saying, like, hey, perhaps we don't need to exclude these populations because it doesn't, like, the data is not clear that they will get worse or are more at risk. But there is some data suggesting they might have some improvement.
It's when people are walking in to tell you they're out of chronic pain, right? That I started doing this for depression and the burning in my feet went away. Or I came in for this severe pain condition, the burning in my hands went away. Or my blood sugar plunged so much I had to eat a popsicle, right? Whereas before, nothing they were doing would reduce their blood glucose numbers. Nothing they were doing, the medicines they were being prescribed, weren't lowering their A1C numbers, but this was, right? And we have these other amazing medications out there. Everyone's familiar with the GLP peptides and stuff like that. Those can be profoundly life-saving for some people, right? Profoundly life-saving. But if you overprescribe them to everyone with any type of a weight issue, we have these problems also where they're losing muscle mass simultaneous to their right, simultaneous to their adipose tissue. Not good, really not good, or maybe it's causing changes in satisfaction because that's going straight for the reward center, right? Could be great for alcoholics, altering that, maybe not so great for some other things. Those are things that we have to consider. And you could probably make the same argument perhaps against psilocybin, but when you can take a microdose of psilocybin and not alter your diet and still have reduced obesity, still have reduced blood glucose, still have improved insulin resistance, that's profound. It would have improved liver, toxicity. What do you want? I mean, what do you want? And it's not unknown. It's just it's the channels getting this information out are I mean, we're one of them. Literally, we're one of them, you know, and I don't mean to be like this, like, oh, big pharma is like, you know, they're trying to hide this or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying there's just this profound bias that's been out there around like these compounds literally as chemicals, you know. And you just have to look at someone like, say, Charles Nichols' work on the anti-inflammatory properties, or you even look at, like, say, just in complete comparison to Charles Nichols, you know, Robin Carhart Harris talking about like the function of the quality of mind itself. Like, you are taking that on board operating system that is separate and apart from the functional qualities of the biological activity of the brain, and that's getting even reformatted, you know, and that changes how all of this works down here. It's huge, you know. Anyways, sorry, I'm soapboxing.
This expands on our concept, or your concept that you kind of are trying to develop, called evidence informed approaches versus evidence based approaches. And they mean very specific and different things. Um,
I did not come up with that term. All
okay.
credit for that goes to, and he probably did not come up with this term. I was introduced to that term by Dr. Eric Cobb of Z Health, you know, and it if you have an area of investigation over here where it's like looking at the evidence from interventions for, say, lesion studies or stroke studies, right? So those are tumors, right? Tumors on the brain, tumors in the nervous system, stroke, obviously vascular injury, right, to the nervous system and the brain and stuff like that. And then you have these types of very intensive neurorehabilitative interventions, and they work there, right? Oh, wow, we reversed that compared to what had been standard of care before. Why can't you take those interventions on some level and look at things that are somewhat related, that maybe are subclinical, don't qualify as stroke, don't qualify as like a full lesion, but, you know, head trauma, other things like that? And if you can introduce those class of interventions and then start seeing these great outcomes emerging. Yeah, I don't have studies specifically on this condition and that intervention, but I can connect the dots and I can try it. And if I see it working in some percentage of that cohort, yeah, that's evidence informed, and like, give it a try. Maybe you need to modify, maybe you need to change the dosage, literally change how often they're doing it, or how much of it they're doing at a time, or whatever. But still, you know, assess that compared to what's going on in their nervous system. And then if you get a nice output, okay, let's keep going with this and see how much we can bring someone back from something that we're like literally waiting for it to cross the threshold of diagnosis so it can start getting these interventions. Let's do it way before then.
So here's some thinking, and you know, I want to just make sure we hit all the right points here, Court. But medicine is uh, conservative because there's risks, and doctors are not trained to be innovative thinkers, right? Not necessarily. They're trained to, here's the standard of care, here's what's going on in the background, here's why those things work, and there's frameworks for, here's how this new drug can work or intervention can work, and the science behind it. They have the tools to like understand that, but it's not necessarily like they're not reading Thomas Kuhn, like the structure of scientific revolutions, right? They're like, this is, you know, they've got some of that history from their medical school training, but not a ton, right? Because medical school's not really long enough to get all the way spun up. Like
That's tragic,
it's
considering how much
it's
time those
really kind
people
of
put
short.
there. Yeah.
It's just 4 years is short for how complex the human body is and the history of science and medicine. Um,
It's It's interesting where you start to see people innovating. Like I have three doctors in mind right off the top of my head. I Dr. Joel Castellanos,
Mhm.
right? Dr. Monica Verduzco Gutierrez, and Dr. Jason Hallworth, who I was recently introduced to. Like, so does some of the most interesting. Just him as an example, he does some of the most interesting interventions for limb loss right now. It's called osteointegration. Usually, most people when they're they lose a limb, they tidy up what's called the stoma, the residual limb stump, right? But if you have residual limb pain out there, like you wearing the cup portion of an artificial limb, that's hard to do, right? That's hard to do. So they use something called an osseointegration, where literally they have the metal rod fused straight into the bone, right? And for a lot of people, that works better. That works better and makes it much easier to, reacquire gait, not have pain from pressure directly on all the skin and the musculature and the neuromas that can be left over from all those nerves being severed or tied off or literally redirected. But the thing is, let's say it's for someone with complex regional pain syndrome, right? And eventually, the decision to remove a limb is when the quality of life with a limb is less than the quality of life without a limb. It causes so much pain, so much distress, constantly infected, things like that. That is a hard call, but eventually you're like, please, if it'll make it go away, let's just get rid of it. What if, though, and this is a conversation he and I had, right? What if, though, maybe, for God's sakes, maybe you can reduce their chronic pain with something like a remap intervention beforehand, or maybe if they start microdosing psilocybin or LSD, or maybe they're doing nerve glides, or maybe they're doing muscle vibration, or whatever the fuck, right? Maybe if there's enough of that, they don't have to take their goddamn leg off, you know? It's
Hmm.
painful for me because I worked with someone who that was their choice, like CRPS, and then they have to deal with phantom limb pain after that. If it, for a lot of other people, it worked great. For this person, it didn't. So, what can we do preventatively? What can we do actively, prophylactically? So it's not a measure of last resort. Maybe it's an earlier intervention. You look at what Joel, so Dr. Castellanos and the team at UCSD are finding in their study. They're showing that psilocybin treatment, the nice stuff, the the synthetic psilocybin I got to take, and all they did, the medical grade high end stuff, right? Their residual limb pain dropped by 70%.
Hmm.
70%. That's gigantic, right? And their pain flares also a very similar percentage. That's an enormous amount of relief, right? And that makes it possible then to wear an artificial limb with a cup, right? It's just, and then from there the lateral consequences pervade, right? If you can stop the neuropathic pain in the residual limb, if you can stop the neuropathic pain from the fucking diabetes, right? So many conditions are similar to that. So many conditions probably operate with similar or close enough mechanisms of action that they too would be responsive. Um, and it's just a tragedy that we're not, and you look at other people who are innovating, so like Dr. Gutierrez that I mentioned, department chair of rehabilitative medicine, University of Texas, San Antonio, right? She's dealing with all sorts of crazy pain. She's a physiatrist, she's a professor, she's a department chair. Everybody that comes in, much like Joel, much like Dr. Castellanos is coming in, much like Dr. Hallworth, they're dealing with people that, like, what else is there to do? Nothing is working, right? And so at one point, I think she was dealing with, like, guess what's more common in children than asthma in the United States these days?
Oh, really?
Long
That's
COVID.
tough. Oh, okay.
right?
I was thinking diabetes, but yeah, long COVID makes sense.
Well, diabetes is very high there too, but actually, long COVID is more pervasive than asthma in children in the United States now, and so extreme autonomic dysregulation, and like you have crawling weird sensations, or just flat out pain or aches or whatever, and so you know the nice thing about physiatrists, they're very practical. What works? I don't know why it works, but what works? And so they're using like gua sha, so cupping, and it lets people like change, put alterations, and so a lot of people like pressure, baroception tends to dampen down nociceptive, painful or noxious stimuli. So cupping is like sort of pressure in reverse in a way that we don't normally get. So it's kind of a novel sensation. So you know, either do it with a silicone cup and you kind of suck it, create suction on it, or if you're using a classic glass one, it's got some pump on it. Anyways, it sucks it up, and then you can kind of pull this upper dermal layer away from the underlying layer, and that creates enough change in a lot of those baroreceptors that it helps to start down regulating, changing the granularity and how the mechanoceptors. Anyways, so she finds out from the community, hey, this works great, right? This works great. Why don't we start doing more of that? This is something I was introduced in Z Health forever and a day ago. The Chinese have been using this for a bazillion years. Eastern European countries, a bazillion years. It's just something that's a known thing. And instead of like waiting for the study that 100% confirms this works with everybody, it works with enough. It works with enough people to give it a try, and it's like, it's, they don't have the luxury of not trying. Not when people are like, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And by this, right? I don't think I want to do this anymore. When people start considering MAID or something like that, it's the same problem we're seeing with the special application permit for cluster headache to Health Canada that Therasil's been working on, where there are people with end of life issues, right? Very severe, it's like they've got a terminal diagnosis. They will die from this condition, right? Causes existential distress and anxiety. They can get granted MAID, like, medically induced suicide for those that are terminal. They can get permission for that granted quicker than they can for psilocybin. Not good, really not good. It's the finger wagging, the hand wringing, right, over stuff that has been demonstrably proven to be misinformation, right? When we're talking about that harm reduction paper you brought up, right? It stands. It stands across time. It stands across even when we're looking at.
I'm putting it in the chat, by the way. That
Great.
paper, I just found it.
When we look at states, though, where we see this increased abuse of psychedelics, right? The ER visits proportionally aren't skyrocketing compared to previous use, right? The adverse events proportionally aren't skyrocketing compared to previous use. Like, if anything, in some of those places, we're seeing, like, because they can walk into the ER and not worry about getting arrested or something like that, they're probably getting better care, better harm reduction as a result, ideally. Anyways, I mean, we will see some numbers change just because more people are doing it. I think that recent microdosing survey that came out showed something like 12 million people are suspected to have microdosed psilocybin in the United States last year. 12 million. I have to find that one, and I'm sorry I don't have it on hand. Obviously,
the recent RAND paper.
I think you're correct. Yeah. So
I didn't get to tell you yet. I got quoted in Forbes quite a bit in an article talking about that RAND report, came out this morning. So
I had no
there's a
idea.
lot of people breaking the law to do these things for reasons. They're not breaking the law for no reason.
No,
Um,
no.
and they're going often without any guidance from physicians because physicians aren't really able to speak about this safely without putting their
There
license at risk.
There was a new scoping review. Our friends at Tricycle Day kind of hipped me to this, but there's a new scoping review that came out on psychedelic use. And specifically, they were looking at for pain. And
Hmm.
nearly the majority of those people were using it for satisfying the negative issues caused by their condition. Almost none of them are interested in the psychedelic effects, right? I mean, more for us, whatever. But it by the time that people are willing to consider doing this, once again, I know I'm beating a dead horse, but like standard of care has been exhausted. They have literally tried everything that Western medicine has to offer and then some, and they're usually incredibly compliant, very, very, very motivated to get better because they're miserable. By the time that, like, people that never in their lives would consider using a psychotropic drug like this, when they hear this, they're like, okay, I'll try anything. And it's literally their hands go up and whatever veil was in front of their eyes, it's gone, and it's usually some friend of theirs, if they come from a very traditional background or something like that, where they would just, I'm not going to do that. It's usually some friend of theirs says, I got to tell you something. My cousin had very severe treatment resistant depression. They'd done multiple suicide attempts. They tried this. They've been in remission for the last 3 years. Or my wife, you may not know this, she has severe migraine and she does this, and like it's the only thing that makes them go away, or who knows. It's usually a story like that, or like, my
Right.
brother-in-law has had PTSD ever
So,
since he came back from Afghanistan. Take your pick.
so in terms of New Mexico, there's a lot of rulemaking going on. There were a couple comments in the chat that said that indicated to you that some more depth needed to be brought to the education on the topic as rulemaking is going. Um,
Yeah.
and uh, you and I are quite involved in this chronic pain space. We've both had quite a bit of chronic pain in our day, and we are the board members at Psychedelics and Pain Association, which is trying to coordinate around this quite a bit. I think it's one of the more important topics, not only to help people and all the data behind it, but because it helps us not um, back psychedelics into a corner where it's only for psychiatric indications and psychotherapies. Like there's a lot more here, and pain is one of the biggest indicators that that's true. And most obvious stories that we can be telling that is true. This doesn't need to be owned and dominated by psychiatry. It can be in partnership with psychiatry, and it should be because there's so many comorbid and bilateral conditions, right? To your point.
Yeah.
And then how can we start including um, physiatrists, physical therapists, pain doctors, etc., so that and where I always go, Court, is what about creative problem solving? So we have a lot of problems that need some serious minds put to them ASAP, and then not to mention other kind of adult use cases, religious and beyond. So I I, I would really encourage folks from New Mexico to reach out to Court and I and go to the Psychedelics and Pain Association website, psychedelicsandpain.org, to learn more about that. Um, I would love to drive down and do some sort of informational stuff for people in Santa Fe. It's only a 5-hour drive. Love doing the drive and love being with people in New Mexico. Um, could be a retirement city for me if I can't handle the altitude here when I'm older. Um, but
You?
yeah,
No.
right. Theoretically, I can live forever, but I don't know if that's really gonna happen. I noticed my first gray hair the other day. Kidding. But anyway, so we talked about the diabetes issue. We talked about the valvular heart disease issue. Was there another major topic coming out of this New Mexico conversation, rulemaking session?
I think it's just it's primarily there's one that's just a whole bag of worms that I'm not even going to get into, that crosses over into family use, and that's all I'll say, and indigenous communities and traditions that have been there for millennia, or at least for hundreds and hundreds of years, that Western culture is aware of. But those are other issues that are kind of playing into this. And what's the intersection between the Western medical clinical approach to this versus indigenous use, and what we've always seen in indigenous use over a long period of time? And then that needs to be addressed eventually. And so those are the big ones for me. There were certainly other things. It mostly had to do with symptom severity, other conditions that were comorbid. What was their psychiatric history that may in fact say, normally that would be an exclusionary criteria. How long has it been since X happened, or you were hospitalized for Y, things of that nature. And I understand the harm reduction focus that they are trying to be extraordinarily careful with in setting up this legal access. And I want to congratulate and affirm that. At the same time, pain, 1 out of 5 Americans suffer from chronic pain, like 1 out of 5. 1 out of 14 suffer from high impact chronic pain, where their lives are completely, just debilitated. And not having equal access to these compounds in a way that suits their condition, it's not fair. It's not fair. This is not unknown territory, right? New studies are coming out all the time. There's another big survey study that came out showing people that are self-medicating with psychedelics for traumatic brain injury. I mean, I don't know what to say. People aren't doing this for kicks, they're doing it for relief. And it's profoundly effective across so many different types of conditions. And there are underlying mechanisms of action that we are just now barely touching, right? Barely touching. And like, the way these will sweep across, Joel says this often, Dr. Castellanos, it will be a new class of medication, a completely new class of medication. So, we're just, we're very fortunate for the wisdom of pain communities that have been around for a long time. The fact that we're able to work directly with chronic pain patients and case studies to illustrate how these are effective, that there are researchers like, Julia Borneman and James Close at Imperial, Jan Rawmakers at Maastricht, Jacob Addy at the University of Michigan, Joel at UCSD, Boris Heifetz, and for God's sakes, why can't I remember her name right now? She's wonderful.
Tess Boudet.
Yes, at UCSF and Stanford. It's broadening, it's deepening, and it's increasing. But it's this demarcation line now. Really, this has to go clinical, right? We've gone from we're needing to go from practice into proof, but now where does this get into clinical application, right? Where do these care teams start interacting? We're trying to do that in REMAP, obviously, with our retreats, so solo as well as group, things like that. But there's people around the world now, based on our case studies, that reach out to us asking, how does, we're talking to people in Germany right now with severe long COVID because we published the case study on Marianne getting relief from her self-experimentation, right? Using MDMA and psilocybin
Well,
to
this will
treat her
be
long.
interesting with Compass getting across the finish line, probably first domestically in America. Once that's in the pharmacopoeia, their psilocybin, aka Comp 360, what will be the case around physicians' privilege of prescribing off label? It's very regular practice for doctors to try a medication, even if there's only one bit of case literature. So that's often enough for them to administer. So it's going to be interesting to see how it rolls out.
I mean, the as I've been saying to you for like the last, what is it, 6 years now, as these roll out into the whatever the primary condition is, treatment resistant depression, what have you, maybe eating disorder, we'll start seeing all these lateral consequences popping up. People with chronic pain of all types or some type of neurological dysfunction, and suddenly that gets better, like it's gone. How can that be gone? And it's like, and they'll understand on some intuitive somatic level, not to overuse that word, that it wasn't just a psychological reframing or the quality of the psychological reframing pervaded down through the entirety of the pathways in the cortical receptor loop, changing receptor function, strengthening or restoring pathway function. It's anyways. I think we'll see. We're at a weird demarcation point in terms of regulation right now, and we'll see who's actually behind this and who's not, and who's just fronting, I think.
Well, and the good news is we have the whole globe. So,
Yeah,
all right, I want to work towards close because this hour turned out to be a really long 20 minutes.
I'm sorry.
So it's fine. It's fine. But thank you everybody for tuning in. Please check out Remap Therapeutics. There's a few spots available at an upcoming retreat. Reach out sooner than later if you're interested in that for pain treatments. And then
April 18th through the 25th. Pre-mapping begins March 14th. So please try to apply. 2 spots left. Please try to apply before March 9th.
yeah, thank you for that. And check out our work at Psychedelics and Pain Association, psychedelicsandpain.org. Lots of amazing free resources up there for patients to clinicians. And yeah, that's it.
All
Thanks,
right.
Court.
So great talking with you as always, Joe.
Yeah, likewise. We'll do more soon, I'm sure.
Okay.